Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 295. On this episode, I'm talking about the Dallas Cowboys keeping Mike McCarthy as their head coach. Going into the NFL playoffs, the consensus was that Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy's job was on the line, and after the team lost to the Green Bay Packers on Wild Card Weekend 48-32, expectations were he would be fired, especially with big names available like Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, and Mike Vrabel. Well, guess what? Mike McCarthy is keeping his job and will remain as head coach of the Cowboys, and the reaction to McCarthy keeping his job has been mostly negative. I want to start with this. Just because Jerry Jones is the most boisterous owner in all of football does not mean anything. People have put these massive expectations on McCarthy because of what Jones says on a weekly basis. It means absolutely nothing. Jerry Jones just wants you to pay attention to what he's saying. McCarthy is coming off of a season where he won 12 regular season games for the third straight year and made Dak Prescott look like an MVP caliber quarterback. I may be in the minority on this one, but I don't like to fire head coaches because of playoff losses unless they made a blatant decision that cost the team the game. Winning a Super Bowl is a hard thing to do, and another thing that's bothering me about all this is acting like the Dallas Cowboys were frontrunners at any point this season. They weren't. I didn't go into this postseason thinking they would make it to the Super Bowl or even the NFC title game, which, by the way, the Dallas Cowboys haven't played in a title game since 1995. Acting like them hiring Bill Belichick automatically wins them a Super Bowl is ridiculous. I agree the loss to the Packers is bad, but changing head coaches doesn't make much of an impact. What would is making roster changes, moves to improve the defensive side of the ball. The Cowboys have two elite defensive players, Micah Parsons and Trey Diggs, who was lost for the season. Mike McCarthy was able to improve the offense this year. He made CeeDee Lamb look like one of the best wide receivers in all of football, and again, Dak Prescott looked like a legitimate MVP level quarterback. He wasn't turning the ball over. I don't want this podcast to come off as a huge endorsement of Mike McCarthy. He's not a top tier head coach. It's just I think the Cowboys have been as good as I thought they would be with him as their head coach. They are not overachieving or underachieving. They are who I thought they were, to quote the immortal Dennis Green. In most cases, NFL teams are not a coach away from being great. They can be a coach away to the playoffs like many believe the Chargers are, but the Cowboys are a playoff team with McCarthy, and bringing in another coach wouldn't make them a Super Bowl contender in my mind. I mean, thinking back on the history of firing good head coaches and getting a better one, I can think about when the Buccaneers got rid of Tony Dungy and they brought in John Gruden, but that was sheer luck. I mean, you could really debate who was the better head coach of those two. I don't see a situation where the Cowboys fired Mike McCarthy and bring in another guy who automatically makes them a Super Bowl contender. I like Jim Harbaugh as a head coach. I don't know if his personality would clash with Jerry Jones. I mean, that would be a concern for me. Jim Harbaugh seems to me to be the kind of guy who wants to be the face of the next NFL team he works for. Bill Belichick is the greatest head coach of all time, but I've seen him really struggle each of the last 4 seasons with the New England Patriots. It has not gone well. What makes you think it could go that much better in Dallas? And I like Mike Vrabel as a head coach. He did a lot of good things for the Tennessee Titans, but is he a better head coach than Mike McCarthy? I mean, Mike McCarthy has won a Super Bowl. I know it was with Aaron Rodgers, but it was with a young Aaron Rodgers. It was impressive at the time. I think Mike McCarthy is a good head coach, not a great head coach. I just don't look at the other candidates as a better option right now for the Dallas Cowboys. The failure of the Cowboys is about the roster. It's about the team. It's not about the coaching. And you hear the same nonsense about Mike Tomlin, that the Steelers should move on from him. Again, I look at the team and say Tomlin is getting more out of that team than I would expect. I believe he's a lot better than McCarthy. And in that case, like I said earlier, McCarthy is getting what I expect from the Cowboys. I get it. When you think of the Dallas Cowboys, you think about America America's team. You think about Troy Aikman, you think about Roger Staubach, you think about greatness. The Cowboys have not been great for a while. They've been really good at times. They've been a playoff team at times, but I don't believe they're a head coach hire away from winning a Super Bowl. I think Mike McCarthy has just as good a chance to win a Super Bowl with this team as any head coach available right now. And I think Jerry Jones deserves credit for looking at this on a rational level for once in his life. He looked at the situation and said, what am I going to do? I'm going to fire Mike McCarthy, bring in a guy like Bill Belichick, and then all of the pressure is going to be on this team to win the Super Bowl. And what happens if that doesn't happen? I think deep down he knows that bringing in Bill Belichick wouldn't bring the Dallas Cowboys a Super Bowl championship, that it would bring him a short window of winning some games but then falling short in the postseason, something he's already doing with Mike McCarthy. I view McCarthy the same way I view Dak Prescott. They are the best options the Cowboys have right now. Dak Prescott might not be able to win you a Super Bowl title, but what are you going to do? Move on from him? He's playing at elite level. He's bringing you to the postseason. Yes, he's falling up short against teams like the Packers, like the Niners, like the Eagles. He's not really competing with those teams, but I'm not expecting the Cowboys to be competing with those teams right now. On paper, they're just not that kind of team. They have some really good players, but overall, at no point this season did I believe the Dallas Cowboys were the best team in the league. Yes, they absolutely beat down my New England Patriots at one point this season, but that's a bad team. The Cowboys are like the Miami Dolphins. They don't play their best against the elite opponents. And that clearly came back to bite them during this postseason. I really do believe that this was a situation where the media wasn't really looking at Mike McCarthy and saying he's a bad head coach. They were just hyping up this situation because Jerry Jones kept putting pressure on the team to succeed in the postseason. And that's why you shouldn't listen to the owners. It doesn't matter what Jerry Jones is saying. He just wants to be the center of attention. He doesn't want to move on from head coach to head coach, paying a lot of money. I don't think Jerry Jones wants to bring in a head coach who becomes the face of the organization. And Jim Harbaugh, like I was saying earlier, would walk in and become the face of the Dallas Cowboys. Bill Belichick would come in and become the face of the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones wants to be the face of the Dallas Cowboys, and he knows that Mike McCarthy has no interest in being the face of the Dallas Cowboys. He just wants to be a head coach. I would far better understand wanting to move on from Mike McCarthy if you were moving on to a younger candidate, like if you wanted to get your version of Mike McDaniel or Sean McVay, if you wanted to find that long-term head coach, because Mike McCarthy is not going to be the head coach of the Cowboys in 5 years. There is a shorter window here. You know what he is. Eventually, he's going to flame out. If you fired McCarthy and brought in a younger talent, that's why I always thought the Cowboys were going to replace McCarthy with Kellen Moore, but Kellen Moore went on to the Chargers. You chose Mike McCarthy over that younger coach. And ultimately, because Dak Prescott had more success this season, I think that move ended up paying off. But firing Mike McCarthy, a retread head coach who was already the coach of the Packers, for more retread coaches, I don't care if they are Bill Belichick or they are Jim Harbaugh, those are retreads. Mike Vrabel would be another retread coaching hire. That's not that exciting. We know what we're going to get out of those guys. Yes, you might have some short-term success with Harbaugh or Belichick, but I don't see that team winning the Super Bowl with either of those guys. Bringing in that new young head coach, maybe that gets you excited for the future down the line. Get excited about the Cowboys for the next 3 to 5 years. If you bring in Bill Belichick, you would have had, a 2-year window with all the pressure in the world to win the Super Bowl, and I don't think Jerry Jones wants that pressure on that team right now. I like NFL teams that stick by their head coaches after playoff losses. Look at the Baltimore Ravens. They could have moved on from Jim Harbaugh a while ago. He's lost playoff games, but they've stuck by him. He's helped develop Lamar Jackson into possibly a 2-time MVP now, and the Ravens are on the cusp of maybe winning their second Super Bowl title with Jim Harbaugh. I love what the Steelers are doing with Mike Tomlin. They're not rating him off of playoff success. They know he's a steady presence. I'm not saying that the Dallas Cowboys should feel the same way about Mike McCarthy, but that is something they should be after. Having a long-term answer at the head coaching position. I mean, this is a team that stuck by Jason Garrett because he was their former backup quarterback. He was not a good head coach, and they stuck by him after finishing 8-8 seemingly almost every season. So I'm not surprised they're sticking with Mike McCarthy, who has won 12-plus regular season games in each of the last 3 seasons. I rate head coaches by the regular season, and I rate players by the postseason. The postseason success or failures of the Dallas Cowboys, to me, is on Dak Prescott. If you want to believe that Dak Prescott is a franchise quarterback, that he's a top 5 quarterback, he's got to play a lot better in the postseason. The postseason is on the quarterback position. Dak Prescott did not have a good game against the Green Bay Packers and got outplayed by a first-year starter in Jordan Love. I think there should be more heat on Dak Prescott than on Mike McCarthy, and I believe both should be back next season, but I rate quarterbacks by the postseason. The regular season head coaches have that impact, but I'm not going to blame Mike McCarthy because of one playoff loss. That loss is on Dak Prescott, and it's also on the Cowboys' defense. They were awful on the defensive side of the ball. People want McCarthy gone because they want a bigger personality being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and I don't think Jerry Jones wants that personality because I believe that other personality would clash with Jerry Jones. Bill Parcells infamously clashed with Jerry Jones over signing Terrell Owens, and I believe history would repeat itself if he brought in a guy like Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh. These are guys who have been to Super Bowls. Jim Harbaugh is coming off a national championship. You think he's going to value the opinion of Jerry Jones? Do you think Bill Belichick, a 6-time Super Bowl winner, is going to value the opinion of Jerry Jones? And I believe Jerry Jones knows that. He wants to be the general manager of the Dallas Cowboys, and for that to continue, he needs a lackey like Mike McCarthy to be the head coach who would allow him to pick the roster or seemingly pick the roster and be the scapegoat. That's what Mike McCarthy is doing here. Having said all that, I also believe that Mike McCarthy is a decent head coach. He is clearly capable of winning a Super Bowl. I know that was a while ago. That was back in 2009. But he did beat Mike Tomlin, who I think is a great head coach, in the Super Bowl. And he's a guy who's had multiple successes with multiple quarterbacks. He's won big games with Aaron Rodgers, and he's won regular season games with Dak Prescott. I think it's working out for Dallas and Mike McCarthy. I think he's getting the best out of that team right now. Again, I don't look at the Dallas Cowboys and go, wow, this is a team that should really be in the Super Bowl right now. I just don't look at them like that. And the only reason other people are is because they are the Dallas Cowboys and they're holding them to some high standard that they haven't reached since 1995. To quote the great basketball coach Rick Pitino, Troy Aikman isn't walking through that door. Deion Sanders isn't walking through that door. Emmitt Smith isn't walking through that door. And Michael Irvin clearly isn't walking through that door. The Cowboys are not America's team right now. They are not a dynasty. We're not living in the how about them Cowboys era. Jimmy Johnson isn't the head coach. There isn't Super Bowl expectations, or at least in my mind, there shouldn't be. And the only people who seem to think that there are is the media and Jerry Jones. And clearly, even Jerry Jones deep down doesn't believe they're a Super Bowl team because he's sticking by their head coach and he's sticking by their quarterback even after a brutal playoff loss. And I agree with him. I think it's the right, rational decision. And what's way more interesting than what they're going to do about head coaches, what they're going to do at the quarterback position. Are they going to give Dak Prescott a boatload of money to finish his career as a member of the Dallas Cowboys, or are they going to try to move on from him? I mean, Dak Prescott has a lot in common with his predecessor, Tony Romo. I mean, both came out of nowhere and were really good quarterbacks, but it doesn't seem like they can get over the hump of winning the big games. I mean, statistically, I think Tony Romo is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott, but Dak Prescott proved this season he is a legitimate top 5 to 10 quarterback in the NFL. He just doesn't win the big games. And I don't know if that's about the Cowboys roster or about the quarterback himself, but in today's age, we judge the quarterbacks by winning and losing the big games. I do look at the Cowboys and think that there's a big offseason to be had for them. I mean, the Eagles look like they're not the team that they were at the beginning of last season when they started off 11-0. They finished off the season a wreck. They lost in the first round of the postseason. The Cowboys have a real opportunity to capitalize on what's going on with the Eagles. Jerry Jones and the Cowboys should spend a lot of money this offseason and try to improve the roster because they have a legitimate chance to walk away with the NFC East next season. I think what we should all learn from this situation is to not take these proclamations from these billionaire owners seriously. For years, Robert Kraft was putting a ton of pressure on Bill Belichick and the Patriots to succeed in the postseason. Each of the last 3 seasons in the offseason, he said that the Patriots need to make the postseason. Well, he kept Bill Belichick for a long time after saying that. It took a 4-13 season for the Patriots to finally move on from Bill Belichick. These proclamations mean absolutely nothing. These owners just want to make themselves sound like they're fans of the team and all they care about is winning. There is more to it than that. In the case of the Patriots, it made sense them moving on from Bill Belichick. They had a younger candidate. I wouldn't have wanted the Patriots to go after a guy like Jim Harbaugh. Now, did I want them to at least interview Mike Vrabel? Absolutely. I think very highly of Mike Vrabel, but I don't think he makes sense for New England right now, and I don't think he makes sense for the Cowboys. In New England, I think that's too similar to the situation he had with Tennessee. Like, the Patriots are not going to be good on the offensive side of the ball next season. And for the Cowboys, I think there would be too much pressure on Mike Vrabel. He's an in-between kind of head coach. He should go to a place that has a good roster, but doesn't have Super Bowl expectations. If Vrabel had replaced Mike McCarthy, there would have been too much pressure on him to turn that team around and win a Super Bowl. I mean, this is a team that just won 12 games, but I don't look at them as a Super Bowl contending team, and I don't think Mike Vrabel makes them a Super Bowl contending team. But if Jerry Jones had his version of Gerard Mayo, a younger guy who he wanted to be the head coach of the team, that would make sense to me. That's the only type of candidate I would pick right now over Mike McCarthy, a younger guy who you know is going to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys for the next 5 to 10 years. Now, if Mike Tomlin became available, now we're talking about a completely different situation. I would absolutely want Mike Tomlin as the head coach of my football team over Mike McCarthy, but that's not the case. I think the Cowboys sticking with Mike McCarthy is the right decision. I know a majority of people feel differently, but again, I think they're just going off of what the media is saying, like ESPN and Get Up, how they talk about it on a daily basis about how Mike McCarthy is the problem with the Dallas Cowboys. He's not the problem with the Dallas Cowboys. The roster is the problem with the Dallas Cowboys. They don't have enough playmakers on offense and defense. McCarthy has a year left on his deal. I think it's kind of ridiculous they're not giving him an extension. I think a lame duck head coach is the worst possible thing to be in the NFL because, again, you're putting a lot of pressure on McCarthy. If he wins 12 plus games again next season and loses in the first round, more than likely they're not going to extend him, and I do believe that would be a mistake. Winning regular season games in the NFL shouldn't be taken for granted. Mike McCarthy is capable of doing that. He gets you to the dance. He gives you a chance to win the games. If they're coming up short, I don't think that's always on the head coach. I think playoff time becomes more about the players than it does about the head coaches. He didn't make a crucial mistake in that playoff game against the Green Bay Packers. They just didn't play well defensively or offensively until the second half of the game. And I've heard media people say that this proves that Jerry Jones doesn't care about winning. I couldn't disagree with that more. They are winning football games. Mike McCarthy is giving them a chance to make the postseason. I think Jerry Jones is afraid of moving on from McCarthy and bringing in a guy like Jim Harbaugh and seeing the team get worse. What if they bring in Harbaugh and they only win 9 games next season? There's that kind of possibility. I think that's part of the reason they kept Mike McCarthy. He's consistent in the regular season. You have to give him that. He's been one of the best regular season head coaches in modern modern times. There's no debating that. He gets you to the dance. It's more about Dak Prescott than it is about Mike McCarthy, and people don't want to admit that. The NFL is about the quarterback position way more than it is about the head coach. It was more about Tom Brady than it was about Bill Belichick, and in this situation, it's more about Dak Prescott and his failures in the postseason than it is about Mike McCarthy. This is a fact, not an opinion. If the Cowboys win the Super Bowl next year, it will be because Dak Prescott elevated his game. It won't be because Mike McCarthy all of a sudden became a better head coach. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. There'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.